Now, you may be wondering why we need to talk about how to give a consequence. Janet and I have seen in our work with parents that many parents approach giving consequences in a variety of ways, which is normal because we're all just trying to do our best at applying the principles that we've been taught. But we have seen that there really are some do's and some don'ts, some rights and some wrongs when it comes to giving consequences. So we want to explore that. And we also have a lot of these in your handouts. So make sure you print those out and you have them for reference so that you don't always have to come back and watch videos to get reminders of the principles. So the top mistakes that we see parents make when they are applying consequences or allowing their kids to experience consequences is first, they give the consequence in anger. So it's more that the parent is feeling frustrated with the child's choice and they want to drive the message home to the child. You did X and now you get this, and it's given with that frustration and it's given with that anger. So what happens when we give it out of anger is that it becomes an issue about control and about compliance rather than about teaching. And it can also cause relationship rupture, and we don't want that either. That really takes away the warmth. So if you feel like you're not in a place to give a consequence calmly, it is okay to step away and take some time to care for yourself, to regulate your own emotions, and then give a consequence as non-emotionally as possible. Some parents avoid giving consequences out of fear or fatigue. And we're going to talk about this a lot more when we talk about the R, which is to resist rescue. So the R in wiser parenting. But we want to touch on it now, that we can be afraid of the emotional response that it might elicit from our kids, especially if we've had some conflict or emotional dysregulation in the past. We also might be avoiding it because we're tired and we're worn out. Now, Janet does love to teach that if you are exhausted at one point, you can circle back around to it later. It doesn't necessarily have to be immediate. With our younger children, our toddlers, the closer the choice and the consequence can be together, the better. But definitely our older kids, we can start to spread it out and it will still be a great teacher. The outcome of choosing to avoid giving the consequence out of fear or out of fear or fatigue, is that can reinforce to our kids, hey, I either need to get really angry or I need to wear my parents out. And if I do those things, then I'm going to be off the hook. Now, the next is choosing a punishment instead of a connected consequence. And this really goes back to what we taught you at the first, that we want to drive the message home to our kids about what that choice is really going to do for them in the long run, and to try to simulate that in our home as much as possible. And when we choose a punishment instead of a consequence, when it's unrelated, we are losing the opportunity to connect the dots and to really drive home the correct message. So if you just lose screen time every time that you punch your sister, we're not really making the connection between choice and consequence. And we want those connections to be made. We want those neurons to be created. We want those pathways to really be reinforced so that the behaviors we don't want to see actually don't get used anymore. Next, and this is one that we see a lot, is ending the consequence before the behavior actually changes. So we've worked with parents who had a child who was really disrespectful, and this child lost the opportunity to get to go public places with the parents. And the parents were really good at connecting it. You know, we're happy to take people out into public and on fun family things with us when we feel like we can trust that you'll be respectful to us in other places, and we need to see that at home first. And they did that one time, and then the child was nice for a minute and then disrespectful again. And this is not really holding out on the consequence before the behavior changes. That's more of a punishment where we just give a negative consequence or a negative outcome one time for a choice. It may be like, you don't get to come with us, or we're happy to take you with us. Sorry, don't say you can't come with us, because that's about control, and those are fighting words. So we are happy to take you with us when we've seen that you've been respectful for a couple of weeks within our own home, so that we can see that you really mean what you say. Or in my situation, I have a child who was habitually dishonest with us, a lot of lying. And we would take away something for 24 hours as a punishment when we caught him lying. And then we worked with Janet, and she said, no, really, he's lost trust, and things that require trust need to be gone until you have seen that he can be trustworthy again. And so we did that, and it was several weeks before we really did feel like, oh, we can trust you again. And he came up with opportunities to start to demonstrate trust at home, because he wanted to be able to show that. And it did take weeks. And then as soon as he does something to violate trust again, it's just gone again, and it's weeks again before we give him the privileges that require trust, like getting to go out with your friends or use the internet or things like that. So I hope that kind of shows you the difference between those. Another issue that we see is parents taking ownership, whether partial or full ownership, rather than giving it to the child. They see the discomfort, or they don't want the conflict that comes from it, or they feel like their child's not comfortable, and so they start to take some of that ownership rather than saying, this is your choice and this is the outcome of your choice, and I'm going to shift that off of my shoulders and put it onto yours. So another pointer that we want to give you when it comes to how to give a consequence is to make a plan. So a story that we like to share is that one of our colleagues, she works with children who have radical attachment disorder. So these are kids whose upbringing was really neglectful, and these kids struggle to have any sort of appropriate social behavior. And she runs a facility where the kids come to if they cannot function in foster homes. So their behavior is so poor that they can't even be with foster families anymore. And this woman sits down and gets to know the kids and what their antisocial behaviors are, and then she comes up with a plan to be able to create a boundary, allow them to make a choice, and then allow them to experience the outcome of the choice. So she had a boy come who was awful when out in public, always rude and disruptive and running away. And so she created a plan for them to go somewhere public. And she wanted to take him somewhere public over and over and over again and explain the boundaries before they go into the public place, allow him to make his choice, and then allow him to experience the earned outcome. And she does this with each child over and over again, offering lots of love and empathy along the way, but allowing them to cross that over and over again and experience the outcome, to make those connections in their brain and connect those dots between cause and effect. And her doing this makes it so that these kids start to learn how to behave. If I really do want to go into public, if I really do want the privilege, if I really do want good relationships, if I really do want trust, I need to do this. So when you're working with behaviors, pick a behavior that's driving you nuts. And we encourage you to pick one behavior and not try to tackle all of your kids' behavior at the same time. That's going to be overwhelming. And make a plan. If they run away a lot, or if they lie, or if they hit, or if they are stinkers in the car, set up a time where you know that they will cross that boundary, and then be ready to give the consequence so that they have that opportunity to learn. Next, and this is so hard, and this is really hard for me personally, so I have a lot of empathy for any of you who may be struggling with this, is that we need to let the consequence do the talking. We need to cover our mouths. We need to not say anything. We need to not warn or threaten or lecture or any of those things. Rather, we let the consequence do all the talking for us. Now, first of all, this is what we talked about at the very beginning of consequences, that we don't want to give a lot of attention to the negative behavior because that reinforces the using of the negative behavior, and it's also really disruptive to your connection with your child when your focus is on their mistakes and their failings and their flaws. So if you can just see yourself as a business owner and it's a business transaction or a mathematical equation, take the emotion out of it. They did this plus this, and so it equals this. And you just step out of the way and you let the consequence be uncomfortable for them. They are going to turn on their thinking brains and figure out how to self-correct without your warnings, without your lecturing, without your threatening, without any of that. And they will get it faster if you can zip your lip and let the consequence do the talking. We love to preach here. Use your words for connection, not for correction. We really want 90% of your relationship to be about the warm, gooey, connecting stuff and not about getting in and correcting them. You let the consequences do that. So an example of this is my son likes to go to the skate park, and he likes to do tricks on his scooter at the skate park, and we had to talk about what the boundaries were with the skate park, that we needed to know who he was with, when he was coming home, and how he was getting home. And he went to the skate park one time and didn't honor those boundaries. And I wanted to say a lot about how disrespectful that was and give a lecture and try to make him feel bad about it. But I just had to leave it alone. And then the next time that he wanted to go to the skate park and he asked for permission, just said that doesn't work for us. So we're going to have to say no. And then he'd say, why? Say, we trust that you'll be able to figure that out. And then just leave it alone. So the consequence does the talking. And now he has to turn on his thinking brain and think about his choices and think about the outcomes of those choices. And we're not getting into friction with him about it, but we're still respecting ourselves and asking that our boundaries are honored. Next is offer empathy. We want to drive home the message for all of you to really believe that your child is learning and growing, that this is their first time being a human being too, and they're just trying to figure things out. And it's normal for a child to test a boundary and to cross a boundary and to need to learn from it. We are still that way too. There are still things that I am struggling with and consequences that I still suffer. And I know that a parent, if they were to give me compassion rather than shame or lecturing, I would be able to navigate that situation a lot better, learn from it a lot faster, and have my self-esteem intact because of it. Offering empathy really communicates to our kids that the behavior was not okay, but they are still okay and worthy of love. And this is really important to separate behavior from the person and from their core identity. And we talked about that a lot in warmth. So if you need a reminder on that, head back to that section. Next is when you give a consequence, do not engage in any sort of power struggle. I know that with my oldest, when I give a consequence, he wants to negotiate, he wants to argue, he wants to tell me how I'm wrong, and it becomes this power struggle that then leads to emotional escalation between the two of us, and it's a relationship rupture. Now, the reason why they want to engage in the power struggle is they don't like the feeling of ownership. They're wanting to give it to you instead of to them. And if they can get you mad, then they can say, hey, you're actually the one with the problem. I'm totally fine and you're just ridiculous. And so we don't want to do that. Like I said earlier, we want it to be a mathematical equation. You did X and X and that equals X. And we're not going to be emotional about it. We're not going to escalate. I'm not going to try to force you to feel any sort of remorse or to quote unquote get it. We are just giving the consequence and trusting the process. If a power struggle is about to ensue, walk away. Get away from the situation, leave the house if you need to, let it just be. And if you need some help figuring out how to not engage in a power struggle with your kiddos, this would be a great time for group coaching or for one-on-one coaching. We definitely have some people who have been in situations where their child will engage in a physical struggle or will say, "You can't make me." And we want to help you be able to navigate those things too. But for sure, walk away. And any other behavior that they use afterward that's inappropriate, there can be a consequence for that as well.